Yeah, it's funny how it takes longer.
Mm.
Okay, hello again, Sarah.
Hello, nice to see you again and be back.
You too, thanks. And it's been cool. We've had a bit of feedback. People have watched and listened, and oh, what was that?
That
Must be my headphones. There was a random ringing. Sorry.
Oh.
Yeah, and lots of happy listeners. They were really appreciating what information you've imparted. So thank you for sharing last time. And
cool.
I thought this time we'll go more kind of in depth into fueling and hydration and a few other bits and pieces like contraception, that sort of stuff. So, to get us started, I figure, can we talk over race prep and race fueling? Like, does it change across the cycle for women? Like, what are our more specific considerations?
It's a really good question. I guess if you think about, like, based on the first time that you and I chatted and we spoke about how estrogen prevents that ability to store carbohydrate, or it can inhibit it. And so if you're in your peak ovulation and fertile phase where you're making lots of estrogen, the whole carb load process can take a lot longer. So I think traditionally, like hobbyist runners know that having carbohydrate containing food before race day is really important, and maybe they focus on that evening meal the night before. But I guess something to play with in your training is across certain times of my cycle, particularly in my first part, so my first 14 days, if I start that carb loading a little earlier than just the night beforehand, is my experience in a race or in a planned workout going to be more beneficial and more pleasant, and you feel like you've done carb loading justification than just focusing on that meal the night before. The research is minimal in that area, but we do know the impact on estrogen and carbohydrate. So I think it's definitely something to play with. And I'm sure you guys give messages to your runners around do the training with food and do the experimenting in your training, not the night before race day and not kind of in those weeks leading up to the big event that people are training for. So that would be some considerations for females, is to know that your carb sensitivity and your ability to store carbohydrate can be influenced by estrogen, and therefore having a regular cycle and knowing when you might need more carbohydrate to feel like you're getting more from your running could be quite useful.
Cool, thank you. What about, eating windows around exercise? Like there's that whole like half hour sort of afterwards that people talk about needing to get in carbs and protein. Like, what are your thoughts around eating windows?
Yeah, my understanding is that recent research is kind of busted that myth, and that you don't have to be like sculling a shake of protein or eating boiled eggs on your drive back from Rapaki or whatever to get in that protein. What's important is your protein intake across the day after heavy loads of exercise. And we know, that a lot of people who've got busy lives, protein takes more preparation than carbohydrate. And I definitely know in the work that I do with women, lunchtime meals, for example, they're not getting in enough protein, or snacks tend to be carbohydrate based versus protein based. So like, for example, fruit instead of fruit and yogurt, or crackers instead of crackers and tuna, or crackers and cottage cheese, something like that. So, I mean, it's what works for you. I definitely think that including enough protein across the day. Do you think people would know how to work out how much protein is their requirement? So should I give some guidelines on that?
The guidelines would be great.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
So the maths that I would use with the client is we need around 0.8 to 1 gram of protein per kilo of body weight. So if you take 0.8 or 1, if you think your needs might be more, and then you times that by your body weight, that's how much protein in grams that you'll be aiming for in a day, spread across meals. So that's how I would work that out with somebody.
Awesome. And what are your go-to like easy kind of protein snacks?
Easy protein snacks. If you are plant-based, or if you're maybe looking at animal proteins for whatever reason and not wanting to include so much of them, your protein sources are tofu is really high in protein. Lots of people don't like tofu, but it's a goodie. It's also really high in calcium and iron, which makes it awesome. You can use soft tofu in smoothies, and don't knock it until you try it. You cannot taste it, and it kind of behaves like sour cream. So making smoothies with protein would be a nice, easy snack idea. Other plant-based snacks that contain protein, things like edamame beans and peas also contain proteins. So you could do, I'm kind of weird because I'm a dietitian, but I like snacking on edamame beans, or you can make hummus, like a hummus with edamame beans and peas, and use that on crackers or on toast would be quick and easy. Grains like oats and quinoa and millet also have protein, so you could make like homemade like pea protein and oat bars, for example, to have as a snack option as well. It could be something else that you use in your fuel for training too. And other protein sources that are plant-based are hummus, obviously, and your beans and lentils. So there's lots of recipes. Like I make a black bean brownie. Sounds weird as well, but don't knock it till you try it. It's a Nadia Lim recipe if you want to look it up. But those types of things, like incorporating plant-based proteins in a novel way that feels really nice and enjoyable for you. If you are somebody who includes dairy and animal proteins, then obviously it's easier to hit your protein sources and your protein count. Things like tinned fish are really quick and easy, and you can keep them in your desk at work, for example, so you don't have to do lots of preparation. Using like leftover cooked chicken and things as part of your lunch and your snacks could be another really good idea. Big fan of cottage cheese. And I think for females in that midlife stage, we know that calcium is really important as well. And the cool thing about food rather than supplements is you get more bang for your buck. If you're looking at things like dairy for protein, you're also getting more calcium in as well. Boiled eggs are nice and quick and easy, those types of things.
Awesome, thank you. Okay, so for race fuel, like, what are your thoughts? Do we need much protein when we're running a race, or so more carbohydrate? What are your thoughts on race fuel for people? Yeah. And does it change across the cycle?
Yeah. I guess I sound like a broken record today, but there's no clear evidence that, in terms of that race day, like, for example, there's been research on Olympians who've won gold medals during their periods. And then there's other people who feel that they absolutely can't do their best on a race day during their period. So it tends to be a really individual experience of the female, like the individual taking part. In terms of some easy and really basic tricks around race fueling and what you should be doing, carbohydrates are your must, and my advice here is to start sooner rather than later. I think a lot of people get caught up in that race day buzz, and I know that I've got experience of doing that as well. And so making sure you start nice and early is really important. We know that your requirements after an hour increase. So humans store glucose as glycogen in our muscle and our liver. And we've got kind of enough capacity for around an hour of exercise, but anything beyond that you should be replacing. And if you're looking at endurance training or an endurance, for example, can you still hear me, Ellie?
Yes, I'm just going to turn my speaker down a little.
We're all good?
Good.
Yeah, thanks. Technical difficulties today, eh? What I was saying is, if it's an endurance event that you're participating in or that you're training for, starting that carbohydrate early and continuing on throughout your race is really important. Aiming for around 30 to 60 grams of carbohydrate per hour. And it's more like 90 grams after a period of 2 hours, which sounds like a lot. In terms of like food reference, like a medium banana would have about 30 grams of carbohydrate. One piece of bread has 15 grams of carbohydrates. If you're doing like half sandwiches, for example, that would be quick and easy. In my experience, tackling the fluid, so hydration and carbohydrate all in one kind of model is really easy for people. So 250 mils of like your common electrolyte drinks is around 12 to 15 grams of carbohydrate, but then you're also getting in your fluid, which is really handy. And things like your gels and 4 to 5 jet planes is around 20 to 25 grams of carbohydrate. So start early, do your math, do a race day plan around this is my grams of carbohydrate and these are my food sources, and how can I be incorporating them. We know that as exercise goes on and the stress hormones at play start to occur, especially in runners, is that our gut blood supply lessens, and so digestion becomes really problematic for lots of runners. So actually better to eat earlier on in your race if you are needing to eat, not just using things like gels and lollies, etc., because your gut's more able to tolerate food in that earlier part than later on in the race. And again, training your gut is just important as training the thing between your ears and your body as well. In terms of the protein question, we know that the longer that you exercise for, your protein requirements also have to be included. And if you think about endurance races, I don't know, like the famous Kepler and all those types of races, if you're out there for 6, 7, 8 hours, you would never go to a work day and have 6 or 7 or 8 hours without eating. So why expect your body to do the same for that amount of training or that amount of activity? So including foods that you feel happy to eat while you're running that also include protein. I'm a peanut butter monster, so I would say peanut butter. I've also played with things like protein pancakes or pikelets that I've used protein powder in, which can be really nice and easy to swallow. You can buy hydration drinks that include amino acids as well, so that's your protein hit. And if you're a runner who struggles with getting hungry while you're training and while you're racing, I definitely think incorporating small amounts of fat, but definitely protein in what you're consuming will help curve that appetite and actually keep you satisfied, because it's pretty easy to get sick of sugar along the way.
Oh, it so is, yeah. And I think that's another thing too, people get a bit of flavor fatigue. Like, we're not used to eating that much sugar in a day, and then you go out and you're doing a long run and it's like, actually, I'm not used to this. Like, my gut's not used to this. So it is nice to have a combination.
I think so too. And finding things that work for you. Like, I don't want to make this about what works for me, but, playing with, there's so many running forums and resources like you guys who, have the privilege of working with lots of different runners and athletes and sharing tips and tricks, and not being afraid to try new things to see if you can find flavors that you get less fatigued of. I loved peanut slabs, and when I did the Kepler, that was my thing that I really looked forward to along the way. So finding things like that you feel excited about eating, I think is important.
I'm like that with Snickers. I've hooked on, it's taken me a long time to find stuff that actually works. I've had some really shitty races where my guts has just gone, not doing anything. And now I'm lucky that I'm starting to find things that it's happier with, and
absolutely.
And Spring Energy, I quite like that.
Yes, I've never tried that brand, but I hear really good things about them.
Yeah, it's quite natural and quite yummy, but very expensive as well.
That's a tricky thing, isn't it? It's a tricky thing. I guess the other thing to be thinking about around getting caught up in that race hype, and then running into walls with actually feeling really hungry and flat, and you've missed the carbohydrate that you needed along the way, or you haven't been meeting your hydration goals. Things like keeping a copy of your race plan on you. I saw lots of people on the Kepler having them in a waterproof seal, so they can look at their race plan. People writing their plan on their arm so they can kind of remind themselves to do it, or using your watch, using alarms and things to prompt you to eat and to drink. I think that's really important.
Yeah, I reckon kind of every half hour, just check in and go, how much have I had to eat? How much have I had to drink? Does this seem right for the conditions and, what I'd normally do? Because it's so easy to kind of, get distracted by, I'm in the race, and you forget about all that stuff. Yeah, I feel really good until I don't feel really good.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, so you touched on it there. What about hydration? Should we be changing our hydration strategy across our cycle? If we're running a marathon or an ultra during follicular phase versus luteal, and electrolytes versus water, what are your thoughts about all things hydration?
Yeah, it's a really good question. So in the first conversation that you and I had, we spoke about how during your luteal phase, so after ovulation is where we make progesterone, and you only make progesterone after you ovulate. We know that progesterone increases your body temperature. So, if you've struggled with a fertility journey before, or maybe people in your world who have temperature tracking, ovulation is something that females can do, because you can see the incline in your basal body temperature from ovulation. If you're therefore a runner training in the heat, for example, or you're racing in the heat, during your luteal phase, it would be fair to assume that perhaps you felt more sensitive to that increase in heat, and therefore would be sweating a bit more. We also know that progesterone can increase sodium loss, so electrolyte replacement is really important during that time. If you're perimenopausal and you're struggling with hot flashes anyway, and that core body temperature regulation being affected essentially by the lack of estrogen from your cycles going through more of those menopause times. Then again, things like your hot flushes while you're training might be really irritating. But I was actually reading the other day, you'll find this interesting. They were looking at hot flushes and quality of life among runners versus non-runners, and the runners reported much less difficulty with hot flushes. And they couldn't find an exact scientific reason, but they think it's probably because we are used to being uncomfortable.
Yeah.
And we kind of find this weird pleasure in the suffering that only each other can understand. And so perhaps we're a little more resilient to the yucky symptoms of perimenopause, like hot flushes, because we're used to being sweaty and hot and training and uncomfortable.
Yeah.
So that's just kind of a fun fact aside from the question. With your hydration, most of your runners will know hydration outside of racing and running is really important. So during like the day, aiming for 2 to 3 liters a day. And then during your actual running, around 300 to 500 mils per hour is what we kind of recommend. Making sure that you're including salt in your diet, don't get like crazy and add it to everything. And there's lots of sodium in food already, but again, things like electrolytes can be really handy because they contain everything that you need. Again, lots of your runners will know the only way to tell if you're hydrated during the day, so outside of your training, is to check your wee. So if it's clear, except for the first one in the morning is always concentrated, that's a good sign that you're hydrated. And when you're running, I don't know if you encourage your athletes to do this, but to be weighing themselves after training and seeing if there's any loss there to help them on their way.
Yeah, we don't normally do that. Like it does crop up with the actual races, like Tarawera will weigh athletes before and afterwards as part of their health check. But I think, yeah, like that's good advice to be checking in with yourself before and after a long run as well. Like I do that, but I haven't actually talked with people about that. So it's a good pro tip there.
Yeah. I think it's something really quick and easy. So the whole point of that being, if people don't know, that you can measure your fluid loss. So by weighing yourself before a run and then afterwards, and then being able to work out where you didn't quite meet your hydration. I don't know about you, Ellie, but I think that overhydration is probably more common. Do you find that?
I don't know. Like I think maybe I'm using my own bias, but I've had a race where I was really dehydrated going into it, and then it was just like a real derailer. So I think that people probably aren't as aware of hydration and how much it impacts. Well, I feel it impacts race day performance and fueling. And so I don't know. I'm on the fence about that. I think it's kind of 50-50.
Yeah. I worry about those big races like, for example, like coast to coast or whatever. And if someone's unwell and then St. John's puts an IV line or whatever in, like if without actually knowing, is it dehydration or overhydration? Because a lot of the symptoms feel the same for the runner lying on the ground.
Yeah, and it is so risky too. Overhydration, like hyponatremia, is something, like smaller females are more predisposed to. So we do need to be quite conscious of it. Yeah.
It's a tricky
I don't
one.
know. What are your thoughts on hyponatremia?
I mean, that's what I was alluding to before around that whole overhydration.
Yeah.
Like getting into that, what do I need? And I really liked your tip before around every 30 minutes, checking in with yourself. What do I need? What have I eaten? What have I drunk?
Yeah.
I think a lot of runners in endurance training and exercise fatigue of eating. And so fluid becomes something that they're reliant on, not just for hydration, but they're relying on that for the glucose as well, with the carbohydrate. So if you have a tendency to get into that phase of just drinking, I definitely think that experiment of weighing yourself before and after a run could be quite interesting, and seeing actually how far off are you, or did you gain weight during a run from all the hydration? That's a pretty interesting thing to note. But yeah, I think hyperpenetration, I don't have stats that I can give you around how common it is. But I know that it's something to be aware of and something we have to manage.
Yeah. You kind of talked a bit about night sweats, and if people are perimenopausal, if they are having night sweats, like I know one of the ladies that I coached had a pretty rough race, and I was kind of like, what went on, And she'd just started getting these really severe night sweats right before her race, which she hadn't been having. And she said, I was waking up with the sheets drenched, and maybe my hydration was off because of that. So if somebody is having those, night sweats that are really drenching sheets and that sort of stuff, like what is the best hydration strategy there? Should they be taking electrolytes with that, or is it just water, or what do you think about that?
Well, that's a good question. How would I answer that? I mean, ideally, if you've got the time, trying to get on top of the night sweats, like prior, and put some strategies in place. Like last time you and I were talking about alcohol and caffeine and spicy foods, and looking at magnesium and taurine as supplements as well. So if you've got the gift of time, trying to make sure that we've got a reduction in night sweats so you don't have to be doing all that additional thinking. If I was that woman and I'd had like recurring night sweats before a big race, I definitely would be replacing with electrolytes, not just water, because you're sweating. Your body doesn't know that it's not from a big run.
True, that's true.
Losing, the same electrolytes. Yeah.
Cool, thanks. Love it when I can put you on the spot like that.
Yeah, I'm like, what would I
do? I reckon we'll go into more of like a maybe quick fire. I don't know, quick fire round, like the pub quiz we were talking about. So it'll be a yay or nay, and feel free to elaborate on anything. Keto, yay or nay?
Oh, I have to elaborate on this. I'm going to be annoying on the quick fire.
It's fine.
I guess what I want women to know is you need carbohydrates to ovulate. Okay. And so if you're a female in your peak reproductive years, we know that ovulation is how we make hormones, and things like progesterone, for example, makes us feel good. It makes us sleep better. So actually, as a runner, it's so important that you ovulate. So if you are a female, peak reproductive years, and you go keto, I see so often women running into irregular cycles or absent cycles from relative energy deficiency in sport and amenorrhea. If you are male, or if you are a woman who has gone through menopause, lower carb definitely can be helpful in terms of managing weight concerns and inflammation that lots of women experience at that time of their life. But I think if you look at the research around health and keto, it's healthy fat, not high fat.
Yeah.
And it's lots of non-starchy vegetables, like really good quality diet. So my answer is depends.
Okay. This one's what is Sarah's view on intermittent fasting, considering it drives cortisol up, which can promote fat storage? Why is it pushed as a weight loss option? So fasting, yay or nay?
Depends. Depends. I want women to know that the majority of research around keto and fasting is done in males.
Yeah.
Yeah. So when we pick up that information and we try and apply it to our lives and our bodies, female bodies are wired to reproduce. So if you put a woman in a high cortisol environment or a high stress environment, she starts to store fuel.
Yes.
Because our bodies are designed to hold and bring new life into the world and to breastfeed and all those types of things. And although that might not be your plan, the primitive parts of your brain that are controlling all of that are responding to the internal environment that you're creating. Again, for fasting in men, it seems to work great. And I've got lots of clients who I've met in my baby career so far who have been male, and they've found that fasting's been really beneficial for them.
Yeah.
I've also got some clients who have polycystic ovarian syndrome and who are going through menopause, where there's both of those things. We have issues with insulin resistance, and really well-managed fasting is beneficial for them. So I'm going to say depends.
Okay. Electrolytes, yay or nay?
I say yay.
Yeah. If so, what is best?
What do you mean, what is best?
Like, which electrolytes are best suited to females?
I'm terrible at quickfire, aren't I? I'm terrible at quickfire.
Nah.
Gosh, I don't even know what to say to that. What would I say to females in terms of electrolytes? I don't think our needs are different than males in terms of what type of electrolytes. Our conversation before was around, is there parts of your cycle where you're going to have more sodium loss, for example?
Yeah.
So I would say the advice shouldn't be different between males and females, but pay attention to your own personal losses and be experimental.
Cool. Hormonal migraines, is there a way to kind of help manage these?
Yeah. Is that a quick fire question?
That one, oh, sorry, probably not. I just think,
the worst guest for quick fire. So what we know is that estrogen helps your cells with glucose, right? And there are a lot of women going through menopause or when they have less estrogen experience more migraines because of that change in estrogen and their access to glucose. So I would experiment with perhaps like lower, but not low, but lower carbohydrate intake if you're going through menopause and getting migraines. Okay. If you're somebody who has hormonal migraines and you notice them at certain parts of your cycle, doing cycle tracking is really important. To get some consistent data around what hormone phase could be contributing and then supporting the hormone that you're having a reduction of around that time. So it would depend where you're at on your cycle.
Is there an app that you're a fan of for that?
Yeah, there's heaps. They all work on similar algorithms. Like if you have an iPhone, there's the health app, the heart that just tracks your steps and things. There's a cycle tracker in there that I use. There's Flow is another really popular one. There's My Cycles, there's Clue. All of these are free as well. So if you just go into the App Store and search Cycle Tracker, there's lots.
Cool. Are there any, so I probably have gone away from the quickfire now. Okay. Are there any health foods that you think are misunderstood and are actually damaging? So like I'm doing health like this, health. Yeah.
What's an example of a health food?
I don't know.
I mean, you know what I see a lot of is, I guess, foods that I would call like a waste of, like rice cakes, for example.
Okay.
I still see a lot of women who, their lunch meal is rice cakes or morning tea and they have, some tomato on top. There is no nutrition in that snack. That's a very low carbohydrate, a very low calorie snack that takes up stomach room for a small amount of time. So just watching some of those diety type foods, particularly if you're somebody who's engaged in diets like across your adult life, for example, and maybe you're getting into running and learning about fueling your body, you've got to let go of some of those unhelpful behaviors around food. So diet foods that are in disguise would be one that I'd look out for. I'm trying to think of what other health foods that I see that would be harmful. I mean, there's trends like putting butter in your coffee and all that kind of stuff.
Okay.
I don't know if you've heard of that before, like bulletproof coffee.
Yeah.
And I mean, fat switches off ghrelin, which is your hunger hormone. And I said like earlier that women shouldn't be fasting if they want a regular, healthy cycle. And so using things like bulletproof coffee, yes, it switches off your appetite, but no, it's not good for you. So that would be one that I can think of off the top of my head.
Yeah. So just adding unnecessary fat.
Yeah, and not eating.
Yeah. Okay. So this is from Lynn. I have an interest in the older woman, 65 plus. It's very difficult to find any data beyond bone health, but older women have lots of other problems. We feel more tired, our joints and muscles become stiff and achy, eyesight and balance may be deteriorating, making falls more likely. Any injury takes months longer to heal than it used to when we were younger. How can we optimize our diet to hopefully maintain health and fitness, reduce injury and aid recovery?
It's a really good question. It's a well thought out question. I've had lots of success with older, I like to say like midlife women, but maybe older women, looking at low carb for inflammation, so low carb healthy fat. because of that relationship between insulin and carbohydrate, and that's been really successful for them. But it would have to be individualized and taking into account things like your training and recovery and things. Protein is so important, and I see lots of people, we've spoken about this already today, but not capturing protein across their day. Protein's important for that muscle recovery, and I mean, amino acids are what we are made of, and amino acids you only get from protein. And in terms of reducing your injury, improving recovery time, then I would be looking at protein, absolutely, and making sure that you're getting enough.
Yeah. The role of contraceptives. So I think it was Nikki said she was really interested to understand the hormonal side properly. I'd love to know more about how being on the contraceptive pill affects energy levels over the month. Is it the same but to a lesser extent? And I said to her, which pill are you on? Because that makes a difference, right? Like they're all got different active ingredients, and then you've also got things like implants and
Marinas and yeah. I guess, like, first of all, disclosure, I'm not a doctor, I'm a dietitian.
Yes.
But I do understand how they work. So we know that hormonal contraception, so like the oral contraceptive pill, for example, you can get combined or progesterone only. And they contain synthetic versions of either estrogen and progesterone, or just progesterone. It's not the same as what you make. They travel in your bloodstream and they downregulate ovulation at the hypothalamus level. So they essentially tell your brain, they trick it into thinking it's already promoted the cascade of ovulation. You've already ovulated, therefore your ovaries don't need to do their job. And your brain tells your pituitary gland to stand down. You don't need to tell your ovaries to start to make estrogen this month. In terms of like side effects of the pill, it's well documented in research that your risk of anxiety and depression is higher on hormonal birth control as a female. And when you understand what estrogen and progesterone do for us as females in terms of our mental well-being and our mood, it makes complete sense why that would be so. So that's definitely something to consider. We also know other side effects of birth control are a reduction in libido, because you shut down estrogen, and estrogen is what provides libido, but also vaginal lubrication as well. We also know that contraception, like the oral contraceptive pill, can inhibit insulin-like growth factor, which runs young females into trouble when it comes with bone repair as well. So if you're a younger runner doing lots of activity, that can be something to consider as well. Things like the Mirena or JDS, which are both intrauterine devices, so they're progesterone implants that sit within your uterus, they do not shut down ovulation. So I'm a bigger fan of them than the oral contraceptive pill, because they're just working to thin your uterine lining. So progesterone naturally thins our endometrium across our cycle. So the presence of those progesterone-containing IUDs thins your endometrium so much that you either get no period at all, or you get a very light bleed. There's other, like the depot injection is a steroid medication, and we know that it attributes to bone mineral loss. It's quite a barbaric contraception in my opinion. But it's hard. Like, honestly, one of the most popular questions I get asked is, what's the best contraception? And given it's 2020, there's not a single one that I think is the one that we should all be on. And so you've got to take into account, what you're wanting from a contraception. Is it, are you using a contraception as a way to band-aid or to manage period problems like PMS or acne or period pain or heavy periods? And could you do that in a more holistic way? It's a tricky one, actually.
Thank you. I thought this would just be interesting to hear your opinion on. Thoughts on influencers. Which ones should we listen to and which ones should we skip? Because there's a lot out there, like Ben Warren and Dr. Libby, and I think people see these people as trusted. And like my mum went to a Ben Warren talk and ended up buying these big tubs of like $100 vitamins or something. And I'm like, Mum, I don't know if you should be doing that. Like, you've got specific conditions that you're on medicine for. I don't think like, but anyway, that's me telling my story, but I'm interested to hear your thoughts.
I'm sure it's a common story is that whole being wrapped up in the influence culture and where we get advice from. And we know that, in terms of nutrition advice, people actually don't go to dietitians or nutritionists. They're more likely to go to Google or to social media now, which is scary because it's not vetted. You don't have to, in our first, when you and I were talking last time, Ellie, we spoke about the difference between a dietitian and a nutritionist.
Yes.
And that, so I'm governed by an ethics board. So if I say something that's wrong, or if I cause harm to somebody, I've got to answer to somebody. But if you're an influencer, you can just kind of say your opinion. And some of them have, really big following. So you imagine giving an opinion and hundreds of thousands of women are going to hear that opinion and maybe put it into practice. That's pretty scary.
Yeah.
So I would say your experience as a human being is important. And whenever you choose to look at things like influencers or social media or whatever for your nutrition advice, the advice they're giving, they know nothing about your situation. So in the example of your mum, they didn't know her medical conditions, if she was on any medications that might interact with those supplements.
Yes.
The financial burden of lots of supplements isn't appropriate for lots of people either. So just proceed with caution. I don't want to say like this is the one person you should listen to, but I would say, if you were going to take your car to get fixed, you wouldn't take your car to somebody who just was interested in cars. You would take it to somebody who was qualified to repair the car and knew what they were talking about. And I think your body deserves that same caution, that if you've got a specific nutrition problem, talking to somebody or reading information from somebody who's just interested in food is a little different to going and seeing somebody, investing in what your body deserves really, and getting an answer that's just for you.
Yeah, that's great. Thanks. We're nearly getting there with all of this. What about the gut biome? Because there's more and more coming out about it, right? Like, what do they say? It's got like almost like a second brain, like the size of a cat or something like that. So there's a lot that we're learning. How can we look after our gut biome?
Yeah. So I guess the first thing is your gut biome is completely individual to you. So it's just like a fingerprint. So blanket advice is really hard. And we know probably this much about the gut microbiome, but I think that in terms of advertisement around gut health, we've been told that we need to be doing this much.
Yes.
We know that it's influenced and it changes over time depending on things like if you're on medications, the water that you drink, the food that you eat, if you're living in a rural or an urban setting, if you were breastfed or formula fed or both as an infant, if you were born by vaginal delivery or C-section, all of those things impacts on your gut bacteria, which is really interesting. We know that your gut bacteria make 90% of serotonin, which is that feel-good neurotransmitter. So it absolutely deserves to be looked after. And in terms of advice that I would give people, prebiotics is fiber that you naturally find in food. And prebiotics are food for your good gut bacteria. So I think probiotics get lots of attention, which is actually taking exogenous bacteria, but looking after the colony you've already got is really important because it's unique to you and your health. So making sure you're including things like fruits and vegetables, obviously, things like chickpeas, beans and lentils are just really cheap sources of fiber you can be adding to food. I'm a big fan of psyllium husk as a type of fiber, and it's really easy to add to food. Some people drink it in water and try and knock it back. But if you start with around 1 teaspoon a day, you can go up to 2 teaspoons per day and just add it to like your morning granola or your overnight oats. Or yogurt and fruit as a snack. It's a really wonderful prebiotic source. So prebiotics are wonderful. Watch the grog, so the alcohol, making sure, this kind of group I'm sure aren't heavy binge drinkers, but alcohol.
Obviously most have been.
Yeah, maybe in
I think partying turns into running as you get older.
Yeah. Just like swap habits.
Yeah.
So alcohol intake is something to manage as well. And stress, we know that stress impacts on the gut microbiome, and the act of endurance training, although it feels really nice to us, maybe not at the time, but definitely after. What do we call it? Secondary fun. That's what I call it.
Type 2 fun, yeah.
Type 2 fun, that's it. When you learn what's happening in our brain and our fight or flight response when we're doing that kind of training, stress management is so important. And I think because runners have that familiarity with suffering and with pain. We put up with lots of stress in our outside of running as well. So just looking at everything you're juggling and really looking at your life as one big picture rather than just like work is one fragment, running is one fragment, home life is one fragment.
Yeah, but it's all stress, right? Like it doesn't really differentiate.
No, and it sounds silly when you talk to women and say, you being really angry about being stuck in traffic creates a similar brain pathway and adrenaline response to being chased like by a tiger. That sounds silly to people, but those parts of our brain, that's how they operate. They're very black and white.
So antioxidants and the effects on adaptation. So, what are your thoughts on, things like antioxidants, like around just after exercise?
Getting to the nitty-gritty questions now at the end.
Yeah. Just to finish out, we'll get furious to finish.
So what antioxidants are is, so what we know is that our cells are constantly regenerating. Just as a side fact, your ovaries, so the eggs, are the only cells within your body that don't regenerate. So the eggs that you have now are the eggs that you had when you were in utero in your mum. So they're exposed to lots of free radical damage over our lifetime, but our rest of our cells are constantly repairing and regenerating, which I think is pretty interesting when you think about it. And we know that antioxidants prevent and protect your cells from that free radical damage from things like pollution, alcohol, smoking, caffeine, trans fats in foods, sugar, all that type of stuff. So I say yes to antioxidants. We get them from berries in particular as a fruit source, but also all other fruits. And the more colourful vegetables you can eat, the better. And you'll hear dietitians say cheesy things like eat the rainbow, but really trying to get as many different colours in as you can, because it's the phyto compounds, the colours in the vegetables, that are the antioxidants. So I say yes. I couldn't give you an exact, this is how many milligrams per whatever after your training. But I think if I think in big picture context, absolutely yes.
Awesome. Oh, well, it's been great chatting again, Sarah. I really appreciate this. And I hope that some people get in touch with you and get more specific advice for them rather than going to Dr. Google.
I know, the influencers.
yeah, that's right. But heaps of really interesting stuff. So like sometimes we've gone back into more detail about things, but I think it's, there's a lot to learn and a lot to take on board. So it's good to kind of consolidate from what we did last time as well. Yeah, and just really appreciate your time. It's been so nice hearing your thoughts on all things nutrition.
Thank you for having me, Ellie. Like I said last time we spoke, I could talk about running until I fall off my chair, and I could talk about periods until I fall off my chair. So this is a dream come true, really, getting to talk to runners and be supportive. And I literally love questions. So if you want to share my email address with your community or point them in my direction, I'm more than happy to chime in.
I will do. Thanks so much. Well, you take care. Hopefully you get a bit of maybe a run this afternoon.
I did it this morning, but tomorrow
morning. Did? Oh, good. That's even better.
Alrighty, lovely. Take care.
Take care. See ya.
Bye-bye.